Hello, and welcome back to our series on learning Google Apps Script for HR, brought to you by Prairie-HR-Solutions, where we believe knowledge should be shared and in empowering our fellow HR professionals in really rethinking how we deliver our HR services and solutions using tools that we probably already have at our disposal. My name is Jay Finger, Principal Consultant here at Prairie-HR-Solutions, and in this video, I would like to continue on with our user interface project. What we are wanting to do is create a sidebar in our Google Sheet. So we're thinking about putting it, make this a little bigger for everybody. We're thinking about putting it somewhere over here on the side. And what this sidebar is going to allow us to do is interact with this spreadsheet, this employee database spreadsheet here, and pull data, create data, delete data, and update data. Now, this sidebar here is going to be in a different language than we've been working with. We've been working primarily with Google Apps Script. If you watched my previous videos, this here should look very familiar to you. Now, the sidebar itself is going to be in HTML. The content is going to be in HTML, which is a different language, and it's used for different purposes. Now, HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language, and HTML provides the framework that web browsers use to interpret and display like the text, the images, and media. We can also connect HTML to our Google Apps Script to have our functions run out of view and then return the results to be shown on the web page. And anytime you're looking at a web page, what you're actually seeing and interacting with is typically HTML. We will have to have an HTML file because Google Apps Script itself, this code GS over here, it's not HTML. It can't render HTML. Well, it can render HTML, but it can't do the things that HTML does on the web browser. So what we're going to have to do is build a new file and then connect it to our Google Apps Script. Now we could create our HTML inside of here, but then it just gets really confusing. And instead of having one file of just a hodgepodge of various things, it's a lot easier to read and it's a lot easier to work with, and it's more efficient to actually have things in separate files. Now, these files over here, you can think of this as your app script workbook for this project. You can have quite a bit of files in here, and a good idea is to take things that are doing the same thing, like categorizing your code and then placing them in various files and then just connecting them, because that way we keep it a little bit cleaner. So let's go ahead and get started in building our actual user interface. And let's start by working on our Google Apps Script side. Now, when we think about our Google Apps Script versus our HTML, what we're really talking about is the client side, which is the HTML. That's the side that we want the client or the user to actually interact with and do things with. And then we have the server side or the back end. That is this Google Apps Script, and it happens all outside of view. And then once it gets done with that, it'll return it and send it over to the HTML side so the user can view it or, do additional things with it. So let's go ahead and create our actual UI. What we're going to do is we are going to create, actually, let me do this first. You'll notice how some of the indents are a little off here. A trick that we can do to clean this up is we just highlight this entire block of code here, and then we right click, and then we'll go over here to format document. And then what it does is it cleans it up, aligns it correctly. You'll see that all the function is indented under the function. So what I want to do is let's move this down, and we're going to create a new function, and we're going to use a predetermined function name that Google provides us. So we're going to type function, and that predetermined name is called onOpen. We'll need our parentheses, our curly brackets. Anytime that we name a function on open, it's what we call a trigger function. And this pre-built trigger function tells Google Apps Script that every time that sheet is open, since it's bound, once that sheet is opened and it gets done opening and loading, this function right here will automatically run. So it runs on open. And in this function, what we want to do is let's create another variable. So we will do let, and this variable is going to be our UI. So what I mean by UI is if we go back over to our spreadsheet here, now the UI is the user interface. It's how the user actually interacts. So all the cells are UI. The toolbars, all these selections up here are UI. The tabs. So it's anything that the user can interact with. So why don't we just call our variable something simple like UI? So since we're declaring this variable for the first time, we cannot use this piece because, well, that belongs to another function. And we'll get into how we can use this by declaring what's called a global function. To where we put it outside of a function, we can just always call it. But for training and learning purposes, I would like to recreate that. So we have to declare to Google that we are using our spreadsheet app. And then in our spreadsheet app, we don't want to get the active spreadsheet. What we want to do is we want to get the user interface. So let's type in get, and you'll see down here that there's a selection, get UI, get user interface, and it is a method. So we will need that. And again, I like keeping these separate just in case I want to do something with only the UI. And then what we want to do with this variable that we just called is we want to refer to it. And then what we want to do is instead of just calling the UI, that sidebar completely, and fully right after it gets done opening, what I would like to do is create a button or a menu option. So let's go back to our sheet here. What I would like to do is create something up here to essentially give us the option to open the sidebar or not. That way we don't have a sidebar hanging out all the time. We want to have a little bit of control of showing the sidebar or not showing the sidebar. So what we want to do is we would like to create a menu. Here it is. Now you'll see that create a menu is also a method, and it's going to take the caption, whatever we want to call it, in the form of a string. So let's create the menu. And let's call this menu item or this menu title, let's call it HR interface. And now since we're not really creating a variable, we're only using this variable and then essentially commanding the function to do something with that variable, we can continue this one on. So what we want to do is we want to add an item underneath that user interface. And that's also a method. Now, what this is going to require is going to require a title, and then it's also going to require another function. So it wants to know what to call that item and also what happens when that item is pushed or clicked on. So let's call this item open sidebar, I guess. Sure, that'll work for now. And these are separated by a column. And now we're going to need to do our function name, and that is in the form of a string. So let's call this, let's just simply call this show sidebar for now. And then what we want to do is press period, and we're not finished yet because we haven't told it what to do with this UI or these menu and items. So what we want to do is we want to add to UI, and that is a method, but nothing's going to go inside the brackets, and then we can close out that line. So you'll see what we have just created here in our onOpen function is we declared a variable UI, and that variable is telling Google Apps Script that we are working with the Google Sheet application. And in that application, what we are wanting to do is get the UI. Now, since this Google Apps Script is bound to that sheet, we don't need to tell it what sheet it's going to because it automatically knows it's attached to it already. So we get the UI from that. And then what we want to do with that variable is we want to refer to that variable. And then inside that variable, which is the UI, we want to create a menu called user or HR interface. And then we also want to create an item. And that item is going to be called open sidebar. And then when we click that thing, it is going to run this function right here. And then we added it to our UI. So now if we were to run this, what would happen is we would essentially see this HR interface pop up on our toolbar. And then when we clicked on it and opened it up, it would show us open sidebar. And then when we clicked on that, it would run this. Now, we would throw an error because this function right here does not exist. So let's create that function. And that is show sidebar. We will need our parentheses, and then we will also need our curly brackets. Now in this one, we need to bring in our HTML. So we're not actually going to show anything in Google Apps Script because remember the sidebar is in HTML. So let's create a variable, and I'll keep it very super simple. And let's call this variable HTML. And this HTML variable is equal to, now what we're going to have to call is a Google service, and it's intuitively called HTML service. As you can see, it's an interface, just like this. If you caught that, this was an interface as well. So it starts with the capital. So let's go HTML service, and we'll separate that concept and idea. Now, what we want to do is we want to call we want to create an HTML output. Now, we could easily just call this HTML output and then render it or evaluate it. Or what we could do is create an HTML output from file. And that's what we're wanting. So let's go ahead and click on that. And you'll see that it is a method. So it's going to take something inside of our parentheses. Now, you'll see that this is the proper syntax, HTML service dot create HTML output from file, and then it's going to need that file name. And it's in the form of a string. So let's call our file name HR underscore sidebar. And then what we can do is we could end it like this, but I always like adding a set title, because if we set the title, then what we can do is automatically populate the title at the top of the page. And let's call this title HR sidebar. And we can always come back here and change this. And then what we'll want to do is end that line. Now, we haven't done anything with this because really all we did was declare the variable as this HTML service. So now we need to take that variable and do something with it. So this is where we connect this HTML, we bridge it, so to speak, to our spreadsheet app. So let's go ahead and tell Google Apps Script that we want to attach this variable to our spreadsheet. So we start by declaring that we want to deal with our spreadsheet app, and then we want to get the UI of that spreadsheet. And then what we want to do is we want to show, here we go. So you can see, you can see that you could show a modal, or we can show a sidebar, and that's what we want to do. And you'll see that this is a method, and what we want to do is show this variable. So we just simply type in the variable without these quotation marks. So without a quotation marks, it's showing that it's not a screen or a string. What it's showing is that this is an object. It has data attached to it. So if we were to encapsulate this in quotation marks, it wouldn't run because all it would do is show this string. We don't want to show this string. We want to show this entire variable. Okay, good. So what this is doing is that it's declaring this variable here using HTML service, and it's creating an output from a file, HR sidebar, and then it's setting the title to HR sidebar. Now, this file doesn't actually exist yet. So what we need to do is create that HTML file. To do that, we go up here to File. We go up to this plus sign up here and hit Add File. It's not going to be a Google Apps Script file. It's going to be an HTML file. So we'll create the file. Now we got to give it a name. We already have the name, and it is HR underscore sidebar. Be careful with the spelling as well as the capitalization and non-capitalization. It must be exact as it is being called from our HTML output from file. So now we have that. Let's click on it, and you'll see that Google has a very skeletal template. To keep it simple and to keep going, let's just add something here really simple in the body. Now, I'm not going to go through a lot of HTML here. If you would like me to do a separate video covering HTML, I'll be more than happy to do that. Just let me know when I can. But for now, what we want to do is we want to take inside our body here and put something very simple just to see that just to see if it works or not. So let's use an H2 tag, a heading 2 tag, and we'll just simply write hello. And then we'll close that H2 tag. Okay, and here we go. And now what we'll do is we will save this. So now we have something that should populate on our UI. Now, since we've created a new file, when we run this function here on open, we are going to need to reauthorize that. So let's run it and then go through our authorization. So let's first select our on open and run. You'll see that we have to authorize this function. So we'll click in this. I'll share this for you so you can see where I'm going. Going to advanced, whole lot of scary language here, but we trust ourselves. And then we will allow it. Okay, good. So now what it's going to do is once we allow it, it will run it. You'll notice that it ran it. And then when we go back to our sheet here, since we manually ran this on open function, you will see our HR interface. And then you open the sidebar, and then here is the sidebar. Now, we don't necessarily want it to open when we manually do it. What we want to do is do it when it opens. So if you go in and refresh this page, refresh the sheet, Once that sheet gets done opening, it should automatically trigger the on open function and then create this HR interface menu item. When we click on that, it will open the side. We can see open the sidebar. Now remember, when we pushed open the sidebar, what happens is it opens up the function, runs that function, which then creates this HTML sidebar. So we click open sidebar, it'll show running script, and then it'll say finishing script, and then hello. So now since we refreshed this, we've got to open our app script up again. Now, as you can see, inside our HR sidebar HTML, we had hello. What we can do is type in welcome. Of course, I can spell that, right? Welcome, please select. And then we save this. And then let's go back to our sheet. We'll share this tab instead. And then refresh it. And then we'll open up our sidebar again, and we should see welcome, please select. Good. So everything's working now. Now, the great thing about a sidebar UI that's on your Google Sheet that you're working with is these things can actually get pretty complex. These databases can get pretty complex. If you have a employee database, you're tracking far more than just job title and salary. You got managers, you got the reporting structure, you have the time they entered, possibly even benefits and history, performance metrics, all that. So this database here can get pretty complex. And a great thing about this sidebar, you'll notice that is since it's built in HTML, you will see a lot of normal web page style functions and interactions like this X here. So you could actually close this sidebar to continue and then also open it up again and then see it. So let's close that again. Perhaps we could change that title here because we had this set title as HR sidebar. Let's do HR. Let's instead of calling it HR sidebar, let's call it a dashboard. Because eventually what we're going to end up doing is running some calculations in there. One of the first things that we'll do is do a salary analysis on some employees, and we want to take the result and populate it in there. So there is a high probability that this simple UI will evolve itself into more of a dashboard. And that's really kind of the intent. So we'll save this. Now we don't have to manually run this again because we have this on open trigger. And this on open, when we hit this open sidebar sub item, automatically runs this show sidebar function. So we don't actually have to manually run anything. So let's go back. So let me share this screen here and I'll show you what I did. I apologize about that. So this set title here, what I did was instead of calling it HR sidebar, I just renamed it HR dashboard. So let's go back to our sheet here. And then we will open our HR sidebar here. And then you'll notice that the title is now HR dashboard. And we'll work on styling here in a little bit. Let's just get the functionality down. All right, so our first thing we should do is probably put our name box in here. So what we would like to do initially is get the name of the employee. So eventually we are going to call, actually, let me do something a little different. What I'll do is, and we'll have to recreate this, is let's actually go by employee ID because sometimes you'll have, a John Smith, a Jane Smith, and a Bob Smith. So names can get pretty inefficient if we just go by that. So what we'll do is we will go in and add a column to the left, and we will call this employee number. And what we'll do is we will just call this is 1, this is 2, and this is 3. And this will come in handy when we want to retrieve information. We can search by this employee number and then populate the rest of that array. So we need a employee identification number here, and then let's create a couple more boxes, say for the name. So let's go back to our script. So now we're not working in our Google Apps script code. We really want to show this on our HTML side. So we have this welcome, please select. Let's go ahead and create select and please. Now let's create another line and let's do a input box. So we will open up our tag, and this tag is going to be an input. And for the type of input, we want this to be a number, because we're going to be pulling that employee number. And then let's give this an ID, and our ID is going to be equal to imp number. And then let's give it a custom name of imp number. Alrighty, and then what we will do is let's go ahead and close that out. And we need to close out our input tag. You don't need to, but I do out of a force of habit. Let's actually give this input a label. So above that, let's create label for, and what we want to attach in here is the input name. So we have input for equal, and our input name is what number? Yep. Okay, and then what we want to do is close out this, and now we can start typing in our actual label title. So let's do employee number, and then we can close out the label. Now let's go ahead and save this so we can see exactly what's occurring here at this input and the label. What we'll do is we'll go back to our sheet here. I'll share this tab, and then you'll see that nothing's here yet because we haven't ran it. What we can do is just go down and hit open sidebar. And here we go. Welcome, please select employee number. Again, don't worry about styling. We will make this look a lot better down the road. What we're wanting to do is just get our boxes and fields in here. So you'll see that this is a number, and in this number we can either use selection or we could just type in a number. Alrighty, so now we need a name. So let's go back to our HTML here. And what we're wanting to do is create a first and last name. So what we can do is copy this. And then let's move this back over, or what we can do is just format the document. There we go. Now for this one, we're not going to call it an employee number. We're going to call it last name. And then we'll change this name here to last name. And it's not going to be a number this time. It's going to be text. Now, the label for this label, if we do not change it, it's still going to attach to this input box because that's what it's for. Instead, we need to change that to our last name, and then in our label, it's going to be last name. And now what we want to do is create another one for our, for our first name. Alrighty, so we have first name. It's going to be text. Change this to first. Change this to first. And now what we'll do is we will save it. Go back to our sheet. Reopen our sidebar. And then you'll see that we have a number. And then text. I'll put my name in here. And Jake. Good. So now we have a few text boxes. And I'd like to end this video here because next time what we will do is we will create a couple more boxes, make this a little bit more easier on the eyes and more styled. And then we will start grabbing our data from here and populating it into this UI here. So until next time, I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you like it, please hit that subscribe button. And I hope to see you at the next video. Please take care.